keep forgetting to open the fortune cookie. So today, NBCCT, WFSB, WTNH, WFSB, Hartford Courant, New Britain Herald. I asked to report recorded threats against women and children, and that brought up a campus to me in relationship to specific confessions about police who had been with prior threats, and in relationship to lie progressions with evidence fabrication progressions, with connections between each branch through time. On the street level, in other words, with roles with lie progressions that are systemic problems with our campuses. Now there's a guy in the media who was arrested with a name of the same guy who used two names on my answer machine, kept calling my house in relationship to this, in relationship to other evidence fabrication, confessions, and threats against kids, and concerned with the same school associated with that guy, and with the people that I care about made threats about to me. And they told slander was about me through the library, through the media. I asked many times for that to be responded to. They attached me and my family to fake conversations. There's also, I never had a conversation in my life with Subby Scalora, and I never responded to Claudia Scalora's confessions related, and her friends, and his friends, and their relatives on my street with related. There's a Phil Cololo too. I never had a conversation with him in his life. One time, his friends made confessions to me about him outside of a car, connected to confessions related to what is it called? The type of house. It's a Victorian on Two Rod Highway, where it runs into Hangdog Lane, next to what is still semi-Black Mountain, where they built Maxwell Drive in Rocky Hill. That was all land area. Now they have hate crimes attached to this too, recorded with confessions about, they were posting for years. They were telling slanders about me. This is in relationship to their roles with other police natures, with other evidence fabrication, progression, cover-ups. See, we have to understand how our campuses have been used through time in relationship to my when I was a freshman in high school. I did a health class project because we had a video on the area criminal enterprises like Latin gangs and stuff like that, and they had narratives with that related to the criminal enterprise and the drugs, but they had narratives with the kids tied to what I was already observing since grammar school. And related to there's a guy who emailed me. I don't know how he got my email, and he said he was in conversations with a Gold family. He used to be a mayor. Two current mayors involved with related body dumping confessions, and police prostitution and police drug confessions with people in apartments. And then no one wants to talk about these issues. In other words, they bring them up to strangers just because they know. In other words, these are facilitated devices that are going to isolate people in relationship to. For years, they've been telling slanders about me categorically arranged using police information to my family members in related ways. And I have in other words, I don't even know this Subby Scalora. My neighbor says he's related to him. He used to try to get me arrested a couple times. He was not from my town. He used to try to get me arrested a couple times after I did my before and after on of a Fred Guzet, who I don't know either. He was a stranger who made confessions about his roles with police drugs and KKK stuff. And he lived in front of my high school, and he made confessions about roles with it on all sides of it. Also connected to, they had arrested me when I was a kid, and they had a Judge Smith who told lies about me. He said like God knows what he said. So they're playing verbal games. Like, in other words, when I went for an arraignment, I had to write a complaint about this. I went for arraignment. for arrest with a couple things. One of the things was related to drug dealers and things on the other side of my high school, which is with the north side. The, and in other words, they direct people to have to tell lies by controlling the drugs. The adults with the interbranch families, and with federal and foreign interbranch families, and they have methods of keeping people like in a maze. You know, I mean, they have the innocence of our age is exploited by every age. They have clowns for our police, and they have them directing our media. Legal natures, we don't understand what roles with this too. I asked the media many times to respond to this, and they can't respond because they put lies in the court databases too, and they had them directed, covered up by having the media tell lies about me on the street. So now there's the guy with the two names and the threats before this from the police recorded, and the evidence fabrication threats too to cover up because they got trapped. They even have military police involved, with related confessions too. For example, from all connected strangers. So the people making the confessions, they almost understand their parts. Like a Robert Ryrieg, I never had a conversation with him in my life except for online. One time he walked by me, I was flying a kite with someone, and then he approached me. I think it was online. He remember that person I was walking with when you were flying a kite. He said she died on the drugs. He is associated with a house in my area, also connected to my neighborhood. They have two kids in my grades. I never hung around with the whole one time in high school, or even when we were in grammar school. And we never had enemies or the stupid games they did. I mean, like punk games, not me. I never did anything to hurt anyone. I have any hard feelings about anyone, but they're trying to make it like that. In other words, they have hurt weirdos just trying to make fun of people because they want because on the record they're trying to make me slander me through time. This is with boxing too, corruption, interstate. This is interstate too. In other words, with all the things connected. But let's just deal with the fact that I asked to report threats against women and kids, and not only did they not let me report it, they attached the fake evidence fabrication. I mean, they attached officers who had already involved with switching names on other police reports. One of them pretending to be a doctor. They also forged other doctors' names. They also attached me to fake conversations with doctors related to the school through time, who I never had a conversation with in my town, like a Leahy family, associated with Hartford Hospital. I never had a conversation with them in my life. They used to have they have related confessions tied to their roles with drugs and other evidence fabrication motivations and other police forms involved with this stuff. So what they've been doing is using the courts too. There's an Eric Knerr. He confessed to spreading rumors with the courts, and including using fake legal cases to slander me, and in relationship to roles with evidence fabrication, spreading rumors, pretending that evidences that they didn't tell me that they admitted they were fabricated. In other words, I went to court. I went to CCSU to report recorded rape threats and recorded mailbox fraud, tampering, and related women who asked for me to ask for police help, but they're already involved with it. Like they were sharing a police officer with sharing with criminals, like with UPS, proven with UPS selling drugs per them, and in other words, other boyfriends with the same exploited strippers and stuff like that. And this was the context where they were selling drugs and stuff like that. And then a federal investigation came in relationship to what fake 9/11 conversations they attached me to too. No, I was in I was in the federal courtroom right before 9/11, and there was evidence fabrications. I mean, post dating of documents proven afterwards that were inside the court. In other words, so that day they appeared late, as if the court said, well, these were docketed late. Or docketed, time stamped. These were time stamped late. These weren't docketed. This is a plaintiff. My father was a pro se labor plaintiff. Most pro se plaintiffs are writing from prison, but this is my father was doing it as a civil pro se in relationship to union racketeering lawsuit and parts of it. In other words, and in relationship to, for example, to methods to prove it that involve proofs of guys from my town and with kids in my grade that were involved with low level pension theft stuff. See now, pension money goes through locals, then it goes through the nationals and internationals, and it gets invested. And the whole time it's being watched by all different kind of police forms. But we share police forms. We share a market system that is tied to people's lives in ways that they have agreements that make sense to them. But even so, the only reason they make sense because they don't take in the fact that we've never addressed how we were forced to original terror negotiations, forced shared policing, forced terror markets positions. For example, that's with colonization's terror laws. And see, because we didn't have that understanding, because of the way we still shared it from the same base, we still have natures of logic justifying that are incapable of describing how that is fundamentally negotiating with terrorism. And worse, it's covering up. So we have a guy called, so now I've tried to email an officer. See, but they're already involved with threatening me not to make other complaints and with related evidence fabrication acts, inter-branch. And the motivations of this too are tied to their roles with databases, methods of them having lies typed into databases, to in relationship to this group through time, and what they do with the school, how they've been using the campuses through time to maintain their roles, with means to maintain live progressions in relationship to what even the people involved with these acts don't understand. That's why everyone's just blind to title, because they don't see the motivations for the natures of lies, for the natures of crimes that our top legal natures get involved with, and how, like even they're not understanding, and not by accident, like former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and all of our directors of our agencies. There were other agencies involved too. There's a Carla Greca. I've never had a conversation with her in real life. Online, she said that a Scalora family, she's one of the person with the related confessions. Online, she said that a Scalora family is a CIA. And there was also an officer who broke in my house with no warrant, forced himself in my house, threatened me, and said that the Scalora family is a good family, leave them alone. They're out. This is after they already demonstrated they make up lies about me through time. So I tried to report stuff. I called a school one time because they threatened a particular student in the school to me, and I got called back by a guy who used two names, and he kept telling me shifting things. And he kept saying, implying that he said that I had said other things in the last conversations. But he kept calling me back. So then I kept calling him back. In other words, but then I got arrested for harassment. But they wouldn't let me see any writing. They don't follow the rules, because they were before this, in the case before that, when I had gone to CCSU to report stuff, I went and I asked, can I see an old teacher of mine, Miss Gilmore? And the guy was like, he's like already waiting. He's like, no, you know what I mean? He's like, why? He kept asking me why. I said, I don't, I just wanted to speak to her. I wasn't gonna come out and say, well, all these crazy threats that were, because that's what, you sound crazy. So I didn't say anything. He said, well, I said, okay, I'll come back. And he said, oh, well, don't go anywhere. Don't go anywhere. He said, we want you to wait. We're going to have someone come up here. So I sat down, and he kept asking me. And then he said, well, I said, well, that's right. He said, well, because Miss Gilmore doesn't go by the name anymore. So now he offered me information. So now I said, okay. I said, well, oh, well, the one reason I wanted to ask, instead of going right into the rape threats and the disgusting nature of conversations that strangers know online, tied to people I do know, only that in relationship to their roles with this in the past. In other words, like when he was a kid, subscalora, he was like a little kid with braces. He used to try to get me arrested and then act like he was a tough guy, because that's how they have these parents. In other words, these are reaction natures that are evidence fabrication natures, tool natures, in relationship to other natures of police, and not only from our nation, but here, international families. And they facilitate, you know, what really are the causes of racism and things like that. They use this. In other words, they have bigoted police families from each cultural type, exploiting each type. Exploiting us all. We're all one species. We're only positive value when we are the body of its value, which is a body of consciousness of the species, not of a part of it. If we're of the value only of a part of our body, that's negative. We're ill. Our entire body shares one positive identity. Space nature has one positive identity. Now that's theoretical, but that's what I believe. In other words, and then because there are proofs to correlation of it, and these other beliefs are getting in the way. They're predatory to other people's rights, so they're not right. And it's not right to ignore how these impressions and blind reactions to conversations into systemic evidence fabrication illusions and maintenances of them with all different people in relationship to needs to cover it up that were affected to them, but they don't understand how, why. So we come back to that conversation that was shown to us by public school system about the criminal enterprises, and in relationship to Hartford, Connecticut, between New York, the capital of Connecticut, between New York and Boston. This is essential since before our nation's founding. Must understand too, for example, you don't forget Mark Twain, his house, and Harriet Beecher Stowe's house right there, Farmington Avenue. All cockroaches. They put what they did. They made a nice Hartford in the past, but they knew that they were going to make the houses two-family, and they knew that they had denatured the landscape. They denatured the Native American landscape, not only to force everybody to force shared markets positions, value nature systems, terror positions with forced criminal legal natures. That's what wrote colonization's terror laws, like slavery, like witch trials. Witch trials are more in measurement of the nature of the means to the extortion of our legal natures, like our judges, in other words. We have to understand the methods to that stuff. And I'm going to ask the media again. You say it's very hard. In a perfect world, which they brought into this conversation too, and with a number of proofs that we have top legal natures that are of a criminal insidiousness nature that need to tell lies and justify lies, and have other people justify them, that have them teaching that we cannot defend the perfect world. We can't have a perfect world. And we could have had it yesterday. This is why we have machines, but we're still with colonization's infrastructure. Everything they've been taught. We have failed legal natures, but they have a sophistication with knowledge of litigation, tricks, and pathology, and with it already evidenced fabrication methods bottom courts up, and with sick natures in the court in the prison involved with this. For example, there was a guy involved with the prison system. I was arrested again on $100,000 bond, so I had to do 6 months in prison. I didn't have $100,000. So I'm still innocent, and I'm demonstrably more than innocent. I'm a victim. And not only was I was slandered by courts with faked evidence that they admitted to before this. In other words, so that guy asked me, and he said her name's no longer that name. Now she's with a house in the corner of in my town involved with with acting a teacher involved with other drug stuff and other evidence fabrication stuff. For example, with a Frankie Reese that Weathersfield police also admitted using in roles with related evidence fabrications before this, and related drug confessions, and related terror acts with KKK skinhead Confederate flag theme tied to it. People coming to me with, I don't know her. I only know her for her conversations. I never made opinions to her. I never had, I never. They had people throughout my life go out of their way to make confessions to me, and then even not have conversation with me at all, and then reply me to attach conversations into lies, but not show anything in writing. When I was a kid, since I was a kid, this game has been going on. That court never put anything in writing. When I went through a court when I was a kid, the same court, Judge Smith said, this is your father's fault. And God knows what he was saying, because my father never even met the kids that were in front of the judge right when he was saying that. I didn't even know the person's name. These were kids who had walked up to me and they had first they had talked about it. They were going to go see if a spark plug broke a window. So I just walked following, because I'm watching since grammar school games with the related people now with the rape threats, with the interbranch families, like with this girl. I never had a conversation with her. One time I played Dreidel with her, and then in 6th grade, someone kept saying, I said one thing that was mean to her, but it was put in my head to say it to her before she was mean to me. In other words, they set up people to say, that's another thing with these prejudice. They're using this as a means to adapt when they get caught, and not just caught, but with the process. They've been using our campuses for the maintenance of criminal life progressions through time in relationship to things that have nothing to do with campuses and through their stewards. So I don't even know who the guy's name is yet involved with the police with the switching names. In other words, this guy back to the CCSU. I asked CCSU to make a police report. See, this is why people have to follow the rules in order. They don't do it. And they admitted they put lies and falsified police reports, a number of them for one arrest before this. And then they had people involved with the rape threats against women and against kids and against other mothers in the area. They had them affected. This guy, Robert Rodriguez, said, out of nowhere, he comes to me on Facebook after threatening me not to bring up what he brought up, a stranger, about untimely death related to other untimely deaths, like one on the campus of Trinity at the time in relationship to confessions from 2 of my professors. One of them fell through ice and is dead. Pretended I wrote him a letter asking for a higher grade. I never did. He gave me a B. I waited till that played out. Then I went to go say something about it. He's dead. I asked him. I called Trinity to report recorded threats too. The guy, they wouldn't even let me talk. The guy goes, "This is your father, Luke." You know, and in other words, these cops keep attaching me to fake conversations about my father too. They attached me to fake conversations about 9/11. Remember, I was in the context right before it. So they attached 9/11 witnesses to fake conversation, Weathersfield police forums, interbranch families, and judges with roles with motivations from this going back since I was a kid, and with their roles with the same campuses, using their influences over their own kids and other people's kids, and using fake guys to the title to facilitate what no one is led to realize, just to exploit. And that's how they don't realize how they tell lies in predictable ways, and in context they never think will come back and be asked about, but they are. In other words, there were proofs that they were used for that. This was used for 9/11. In other words, so I had no conversation with this guy. He brought up the lady's name. Then I told him, "Oh well, that was a name. There's a Gilmore. There's a Dr. Gilmore who was another name that was forged. There was a bunch of doctors' names that were forged, and there was a bunch of them that made up stuff because when I tried to report stuff related to the untimely death stuff and related to confessions of my neighbors and threats from um, people related to a Detective Dylan, confessions and threats related to people connected to him. I never had a conversation with him in life. I only know threats from him, and through others, confessions from strangers. I have it was an affidavit from a stranger, Chris Walters, also involved with the drug dealing on all sides of the school. In other words, he came out of nowhere and told me how Detective Dylan had prompted him to make all these. He had to keep forcing Detective Dylan to say, "Oh, that's not what I said." For somehow he got involved with the narratives with the judge with Judge Joe Smith or Judge Smith, whatever his name is, the guy who said, "Oh, this is your father's fault. We were there for arraignment," and they never put anything in writing. And then later, the people admitted that when they put the thing in my eye, I threw it on the ground. I went like that, like a feint, and I threw it on the ground, like barely hit it or whatever. Like not definitely, I knew it was not going to break the window. And they said, "Oh, but you did it though." And I said, "No, I threw it on the ground." And the other person picked it up and threw it and smashed the window, and they admitted that. And the other stuff is connected to guys with modern. Another thing I was arrested for is connected to a family in relationship to other people. Like his wife is connected with federal crime online, pretending I was having a conversation with her about 9/11, no, about CIA. And they also, when they forged papers in conversation, they pretend I had a conversation about CIA. And that's how they got the, that was weird too, because they put the, Subby Scalera came on my Facebook page. I was letting him talk because that's all he does is he made confessions one time, and the only other time I know him, he used to try to get me arrested and then disappear. You know what I mean? He was never in my presence. He used to have like braces and stuff like that. I remember because he walked up, I was in a public place, he was a brace, like we wanted to punch his whole face explode. He's a little punk. And then he's got these relatives, and then there's Officer Joe DeMorrow, who I haven't seen him since high school, but he made confessions in high school about his roles, and in grammar school related to his roles with the branch families with the drugs, and his family's roles with the drug dealing and all the different other crime natures. I recorded him when I was little, asking me because he wanted to go rob old women. He wanted to, I lost. I don't know. I lost the things. It was. So in other words, because we don't have people deal with facts in sequence, we have sequence shifting. In other words, I went to see she should report the thing, and I told the guy. Oh, I asked her. I said, "Well, because that was a name. That's why I was going to ask her." about the rape threats too, because there was other connections to her too, and to a place associated with that name, a Dr. Gilmore. I don't know if it's related to her. She apparently has a new name now. But then there are there's a dean from CCSU who switched he was pretending to be an officer around the time there were related confessions from his family members involved with drugs and KKK connected confessions and from strangers. And but then they got connected to other related ways in other cities, through time. So then all these patterns of things informed me with in relationship to recorded lies that are being actively pretended not realized, and how they were going to do that, in other words. So I went there to report things and had no conversation. Then the guy, he said that the lady had a new name. So then I said, this guy was attached to me, a conversation. He made a face where I said that. And this guy already looked like a jerk. You know what I mean? I mean, we have clowns. We have improper stewardships because we have improper facts treatments. And how? That's why they're maintaining stuff like that. There's another prior, the English chair who has ties to the confessions with related untimely deaths, and the Robert Rodriguez who brought up a grammar school to me, tied to the guy who uses the two names, and with the witness evidence fabrications in the police with the name switchings, and with the roles with the threats against the related kids in the school, and through time, this is. I asked to report related things. They threatened me not to, because then they said I was harassing a guy, calling him back because he kept calling my phone. You understand? I called there one time. The only time I called back is because they kept calling me here. God knows what they wrote, because they won't show the police reports. So then I had to go to prison. Then they put me to another prison. Then they put me in some place in Middletown. And then there was a Bob Chase. He was supposed to read a police report to me, and he wouldn't read it to me. He name dropped. Instead, he name dropped the name Phil Claw, who I never had a conversation with. One time I mentioned about that Victorian house in the beginning of the conversation. In other words, because people don't follow the rules, and then they told me lies about me in the media. So everything they're changing the sequence, and they're trying to make it sound like I don't make sense. I asked to report things, and they won't let me report them, because before this, when I went to CCSU, they arrested me for that. Later, they came to my house. An officer came in right then, stopped the conversation. So we had no conversation. It stopped right after he made a face, when I said that that was a name that was used that attached me to conversations with a doctor I never even met, a guy named Gilmore. I didn't even mention that she lives in my town and she has other ties to other related confessions. Okay, and in other words, because for example, there's people from my town in relationship to the police chiefs' families, and in relationship to other families with police in the town, and police forms in the town between cities, who have been facilitating needs to cover up their own lies, roles, and progressions, in relationship to what they don't understand, and then what's causing that is in making the people who are affecting that, our top legal directors, they don't understand it since founding. To understand this, we have to use correlation. We have to understand, for example, unchanging truth, that they fail to explain the natures of organized crime, that were really the methods that needed terror laws like slavery and like witch trials, and why, how methodically, to keep everyone with terror database relationships to all areas. See, that's what evolved to the problem we have today, which is a database problem, because that's how they're justifying things, and they're typing in lies in databases that was also confessed about. So they involve 3-4 police departments not arrest. In other words, Officer McDaniels from an East Hartford Police Department. Now, I was in the New Britain campus of CCSU. He came in right then, right after I told him that that name was associated with the guy who attached me to fake conversations. You know, that pretend I met him. I never met him. So the officer came in. He told the officer lies that it's not true. Then the officer took him away. He came back. The officer said, "Come with me. We'll walk back to your car." He made, and thank God another officer showed up right then. And, so the officer Magnanos from the East Hartford Police Department, and then this other guy shows up. Thank God. And the officer Magnanos, he made me. He said, "Put your hand right there," like touching his wooden handle revolver. And he made me walk all the way back to the car with him. Thank God for the other guy being there. And he brought up my father, which I didn't bring up my father to any of these people. You know what I mean? There's another pattern. That's why they were using the rape threats to try to get me to say things about my father too. And one of the guys involved with the threats against the related the kids, is he attached me to fake conversations about my father too. They've been using these campuses to slander my father through time because of how we had area of federal criminals and federal criminals tied to them, like books like bookmakers, Shylocks, other kind of pension thieves, not just with the federal criminals that were defendants of a former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, in a 2006 case related to the related 9/11 context with the evidence fabrication, the post-dating of documents. For example, because they attacked me to fake conversations about this. So not only can I not get a response to things in sequence, they're stacking up the lies and they're pretending the ones that the lies that they wouldn't, and the threats that they wouldn't let me address in the first place, they're pretending they're real. And they're not putting anything on writing. And when you go to jail, there's a guy, Bob Chase, he said they don't believe in, the law isn't really like that. They don't believe in innocent until proven guilty. They don't go by that. And then he put up his thing and swore, and he went like this, like when he was giving a testimony in court, like he's going to tell the truth, all the truth, and nothing but the truth. He's a fraud. These are pathologically ill courts and stewardships. So he name dropped Phil Colon. Now what do I do about this? Now another guy in the place was directed to name drop Christine, just the first name. I figured out it was the other one because before this I had in like 2005 there had been the girls who had been asking me for help in relationship to the police forms who were exploiting them in relationship with the housing of CCSU, in relationship to other recorded crime and confessions, like with Alina's Pizza also, with confessions connected to their roles with interbranch evidence fabrications through time. And in relationship to my high school health class project about the gangs, because I never was in that place in my life until I went there in relationship to related confessions. And they pretended we were invited there by a Maggie that was not the wife of that Maggie had a roommate. There's a Maggie I don't know her last name. Sullivan, I guess now, because she's probably married to him still. There's Daryl Sullivan I never had a conversation with him in my life. Now, and his wife, only about a cupcake one time. That was it. They invited us through our neighbors who were making the confessions about the police in the campus. Because the campus police, through time, they've had connections to a Gill family. And they made confessions about related police, court police cliques. You know, this later got connected. They made all kinds of confessions, threats, and stuff like that. So I tried to report that I got arrested because the police kept, in other words, everyone was trying to adapt to what they were going to say because they were already involved with like standardized drugs and things like that through the police forms next to the college. There were implications that that's involved with some kind of training and stuff like that, where they with undercover. I don't know. That's what also related to all the confessions about a detective Dillon connected to an Anna Dillon with who was a real estate agent on the sale of the house with a new couple that just came in. Now they had made confessions to me. They would have gone out of their way to repeat to me that they had been calling the police because of people in front of their house. And this was after related confessions from strangers. And the prior neighbors had involvements with what was confessed about, connected to this name Phil Clough, which Ray Clough's the house next to the one sold by Annie Dillon next to me. And his mother had made related confessions and threats to a relationship to this, and she brought up a Goldberg family, which there was, I don't know that. I mean, I know they were just nice kids from a football team I played 1 year. Per related confessions, I had to stay back from a class, a speech class. I never had one conversation with the teacher. This is she made confessions about her telling a story every year about some kid who masturbated to her through a window. No, in other words, but that also got involved with confessions related to a house next to that house with the Phil Cologne on Two Rod Highway, where it runs into Hank Dog Lane next to Black Mountain, where they now put Maxwell Drive and Rocky Hill. There's also a house that made police prostitution roles. You know, we're sharing them, we exploited strippers, and with a Faenza family. I met them one time with confessions, and then online they were trying. They confessed to making confessions related to the body dumping of Billy Grasso in relationship to their parents' narratives, with related confessed roles with evidence fabrications and drugs with police, and again the prostitution and stuff like that. So they verified the Billy Grasso confessions that they went out of their way to make to me, and they verified, and they went out into others. They have ties to Rocky Hill officers who communicated they had, acknowledged they had roles with drugs with them growing up. I don't know their names yet, but then that got connected to another officer. I don't know the name of him, who gave me a ticket. I wasn't even speeding, and I had to go to the same court again. In other words, that was in like 2003 or 2004. In other words, every year I've been having problems with this court. They're not letting me talk, and they keep attaching me to lies since I was a kid. So now they have these threats against kids and women, and I can't get a response in writing. Instead, they have the media tell lies about me, and now the media is trying to pretend they don't see it and hide. And so if I try to talk to one media, I go to Channel 3 most of the time because they're first in order numerically. They have, they have jobs where we're supposed to be nice. They're really nice people, That's also why they have like child porn and stuff like that connected to the media and stuff like that. People recently, they're hiding all that's actually connected to impositions on and through our kids. Actively, I haven't even been able to communicate through this with kids actively being affected by it, and with them telling slanders about me. This is where school bullying comes from, because they're knowing what they have to cover up through time, and they're manipulating kids as pathologies in boxes, where they're putting junk in databases that people have to know, they have to know, they know no one's going to check that. And this is the natures of organized crime, the natures of crime in relationship to the problems that are proofs that our scientists failed to reveal, to let science reveal the proofs that are actually the causes of negative value nature progressions and of actual evolution's sabotage. So I'm going to ask one more time, please, media, because I want to be on, I'm asking on your side I want to be on your side. So I don't have to say, or if I do have to say it, which, in other words, what I have to communicate is that your evidence fabricated with people threatening my family and slandering me through time and with sick roles with databases and uses of kids. So I'm going to ask you again. Put my side. Just do a quick story. Say what we said online about Anthony Wall was wrong. There was evidence fabrications. There was police that switched names that knew it. There was other police forms that knew they used the internal investigations in criminal ways of the Wethersfield. In other words, this is not just the Wethersfield police alone with this, and through time. So we have a problem when people can't report simple threats. And because the people doing it with the threats and with sick roles, this is why we have problems with people in Middletown connected to them, strangers going up giving kids candy and stuff like that. And forget about it. Middletown is sick too with relationships to confessions. So in other words, they stack confessions and they stack crimes that people can't report, while other people, they're letting them offensively pretend that they care with passion about kids and about things like that. They don't care. They're using these kids for tools for their own evidence fabrication needs, for their own cover-ups. The same people that arrested me for harassment, they admitted to roles, evidence fabrication. In other words, they owed me a dismissal. They told me they were giving me a dismissal because they admitted they had they brought a first arrest when they came and they gave a promise to appear to my family members. I wasn't even here. Reportedly, they came with the guy, the McDonald's from East Hartford, which is on the other side of the river to the east, and CCSU was 2 towns over to the west. So I think that guy has a relative on campus who was Iranian. Now also Johnny Duke had one, and Johnny Duke also had connections to the judges involved. 2 per. Joe Ayala, who was also using the same fake legal cases and the same slander narratives as the same people involved with the same drug roles, drug dealing and slander roles. That's why when I was a kid it was weird. He invited me to go to a dance with his sister in John Lyon. And this is a kid who showed up to my house right after my car broke the year I had to do my senior year over. And the only reason I did that over too was because of the way they had the neighbor, these exploited sisters and brothers. In other words, on the street in relationship to a 2 Broad Highway, wanted to walk down the aisle with me, and that her asking me that was in relationship to them, to the police forms and the court clicks, and with using me to hide what they were later proving. My father won an NLRB case against the union that had fired him for refusing to shake down laborers for money. In other words, they were shaking down laborers for money. They were doing cocaine dealing on campuses. They were playing these games with schools, with the kids, through kids, with their roles with drugs and for all kinds of federal criminals. It's disgusting. Anyway, so this Bob Chase brought up this name, Phil Claw, and I never had a conversation with him. And I don't know, and they made it like he's the one on the police report. for the harassment. And then the other guy with the harassment, I said they won't put anything in writing. Because they also referred to what they told me they were dismissing because they admitted that there was, in other words, that there was three or four police reports for the same arrest, which all I had done was go and ask to see a teacher. And then the guy said she changed her name. I said that name was on a doctor who attached me to fake. I had never met him. And then the officer came in. He told a lie to the officer. And then he made me go back to my car. And then later they showed up to my house with a promise to appear. And then they arrested me again, and they had me on a transport from here to go to the New Britain CCSU police from a Wethersfield officer. Now the Wethersfield officer with the transport, McGee, that's a name that had already been used by other officers and they admitted they have only one officer named McGee, so they were switching names. And with that case, before this one, they also admitted to name switching. In other words, the appointed lawyers were directed by a court investigator to switch names. Obfuscating my ability to communicate because they weren't letting me communicate. All they did, in the beginning, they admitted that these were all fake things. They told me they showed me a charge, but no writing, and they told me a narrative for each one, but each narrative was a lie. And I so then they said, okay, and they knew that they demonstrated that they knew that. Then they were told not to let me talk. I had to come back like 5 times, 6 times with my family and stuff like that. They wouldn't let us talk. Not one word I was allowed to say. I had to keep listening to them. And they would write questions when we sit there, and then for 1 second out, they would come in and they would ask me something, and they wouldn't let me talk. They would like really hurry. I would have had to yell to try to talk. And I'm not going to do that. They already admitted the stuff was false. They should have just let me go right there. You know what I mean? So, but a court investigator told them to write lies instead. So then, when this thing happened, after the person with the Robert Rodriguez brought up a grammar school to me, and I called it, one of the guys said that he told me shifting things, but he admitted to being the one involved with using police software policing for evidence fabrications in relationship to him switching names, in relationship to other proofs of his ties to natures of related, proven and further demonstrable child abuse, natures of child abuse. You don't do this to the family of a member of kids who are trying to report crimes, against kids. You don't make up facts. You don't play these games. Then I see this guy in the media with one of the names used by the police and by the court people who admitted to roles with evidence fabrications and with threats with this. And this is after I was arrested again. I was arrested in 2004 for I had to go to that court for I wasn't even speeding in Rocky Hill after the related threats from police and confessions with the drugs, with the Enzo Fienzo, and with his confessions related to body dumping narratives and prostitution, and with other confessions connected to him. His confessions are also important to me because they connect to other confessions made related to the shooting of Greg Kyler. Who was a kid who never had a chance. He was a good kid who these games messed. I want to be able to explain that. They don't want anyone to explain that with terror, because this is intercity, intercampus. I was going to Trinity College at the time, and I was living next to CCSU. No, that's what how they're both connected, and how I was able to realize that the police forms and interbranch families, the police forms with the drugs and the healthcare cliques with the drugs growing up, they've been using them for evidence fabrication methods and for polarity methods. They spread rumors per methods that insulate the sensibilities of people, like young girls and young men, not to have conversations with people about finite details brought up to them in ways that they're measured going to do that. And that's going to affect the way they talk. And that's how they use them as the reaction natures, as tool evidence fabrication natures. They've been using everybody as tool evidence fabrication natures. That's why I've been asking media asking, respond to me. You know, put my side down. But they won't do that because then they have to acknowledge all the lies they told through the media about me already. And let's know about that guy with the switching names and the police with it is.